They say the truth will set you free, but they never tell you about the absolute, crushing weight of the ceiling caving in on your life first.
My name is David. I'm a high school history teacher in a quiet suburb just outside of Columbus, Ohio. My life was predictable, average, and honestly, perfect. Or so I thought. I spent my days grading essays on the American Revolution, coaching the JV baseball team, and coming home to a house that I built with my own 2 hands. And then, there was Sarah. Sarah was the kind of woman who lit up any room she walked into. Sharp, ambitious, and drop-dead gorgeous. She was a high-level corporate consultant, specializing in restructuring logistics for Fortune 500 companies. While I lived my life in 50-minute classroom periods, Sarah lived hers in airport lounges, boardrooms, and first-class cabins. She commuted to Chicago almost every single week. "Just a Monday to Thursday grind, babe," she'd tell me, kissing my cheek before boarding her Uber to the airport. "The Midwest market is brutal right now, but this contract will set us up for life." I supported her 100%. I was proud of her. When she was home, she was the perfect wife. She baked cookies for the school fundraisers, held my hand while we watched Netflix on the couch, and talked about our future kids. We had been married for 5 years. 5 years of absolute trust. Until 3 weeks ago. It was a rainy Tuesday night. Sarah was in Chicago, supposedly locked in a late-night negotiation dinner with a major tech firm. I was down in the basement, looking for an old HDMI cable because the one in the living room had finally fried. While rummaging through a box of old college textbooks, my hand brushed against something metallic. I pulled it out. It was Sarah's old MacBook, the one she supposedly recycled 2 years ago when the company upgraded her to a brand new corporate laptop. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe it was just curiosity, or maybe it was that primal, unspoken instinct that psychologists talk about. The subconscious mind knowing something is wrong before the conscious mind catches up. I pressed the power button. To my surprise, the battery wasn't completely dead. The screen flickered to life, showing the old login screen. I typed in her old password, our dog's name followed by our wedding anniversary. It clicked open. The desktop was clean, but there was a single unlabeled folder hidden in the bottom right corner. I double-clicked it. Inside, there was a subfolder named simply Chi-Town. I expected to find old corporate spreadsheets, maybe some PDFs of travel itineraries. Instead, I found photos, thousands of them. My breath hitched in my throat as I scrolled through the first few images. It was Sarah. She was at a lavish, sun-drenched vineyard. She was wearing a breathtaking, custom-made white lace wedding gown. She looked happier than I had ever seen her. But she wasn't alone. Standing next to her, holding her hand, was a man. He looked to be in his early 40s, tall, with perfectly tailored hair, sharp jawline, and the kind of wealthy, effortless aura that only comes with old money. He was smiling down at her, a massive diamond band gleaming on his left ring finger. On Sarah's left hand was an identical, blindingly large diamond ring. Not the modest white gold band I had saved up 3 months of my teaching salary to buy her. I scrolled down frantically. There were photos of the reception, a massive ice sculpture, a 5-tier cake, a banner in the background that read, "Congratulations, Richard and Sarah." The date stamp on the files was from exactly 2 years ago, June 14th, 2024. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands began to shake so violently that I dropped the laptop onto the dusty basement floor. The screen stayed lit, mocking me. 2 years ago, on June 14th, Sarah had told me she was attending a mandatory corporate retreat in Scottsdale, Arizona. I remembered it vividly because I had sent her flowers to her hotel. Flowers she had texted me thank you photos for. Photos she must have taken in a hotel room while taking a break from her other wedding. My wife of 5 years was bigamous. She didn't just have a boyfriend on the side. She had a whole second life, a second husband. I sat on the cold concrete of my basement for what felt like hours, staring into the dark. The woman I kissed goodbye every Monday morning was living a double life as the high society wife of a Chicago elite. I didn't confront her. Not yet. The history teacher in me knew that you don't fight a war without gathering intelligence first. Over the next 48 hours, I became a ghost in my own life. I used the login info from her old laptop to access a hidden iCloud account she had kept active. What I found made my stomach turn. Her other husband was Richard Vance. Yes, that Richard Vance. The billionaire real estate mogul whose family practically owned half the skyline in downtown Chicago. He was arrogant, high profile, and completely oblivious. Through text logs, I watched the terrifying calculus of my wife's mind. She had structured her life like a corporate calendar. Monday through Thursday, she was Sarah Vance, living in a $10 million penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, attending charity galas, and spending Richard's black Amex card like water. Thursday night through Sunday, she would take a flight back to Columbus, change into jeans and a sweater, and play the role of the humble teacher's wife. She wasn't forced into this. She wasn't trapped. She loved it. In one text to her closest friend in Chicago, a woman who clearly knew about the whole twisted game, Sarah wrote, "David gives me the stability and the real, quiet love I need when I'm exhausted. He's sweet, safe, and worships the ground I walk on. But Richard gives me the world. I don't see why I should have to choose. I have the best of both worlds, and neither of them is smart enough to figure it out." Reading those words, something inside the sweet, safe schoolteacher died. A cold, hard anger took its place. She thought I was stupid. She thought Richard was stupid. She thought she was a queen playing chess with two pawns. The next day was Thursday, the day she was supposed to fly back to me. I stood in the kitchen, cooking her favorite pasta, waiting for the sound of her key in the front door. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my face was a mask of absolute calm. The door unlocked. In walked Sarah, pulling her designer roller bag behind her. She looked tired, but when she saw me, she flashed that radiant, perfect smile that I had loved for half a decade. "Hey, handsome," she purred, walking over and wrapping her arms around my neck. She smelled like expensive perfume, a scent I now realized belonged to her Chicago penthouse, not our suburban home. God, I missed you. Chicago was absolutely exhausting this week. I looked into her eyes, searching for even a flicker of guilt, a shred of human remorse. There was nothing. Just absolute chilling confidence. "Missed you too, babe," I said, forcing a smile as I kissed her lips. Lips that had likely been kissing a billionaire less than 4 hours ago. "How was the corporate strategy meeting?" She sighed dramatically, leaning against the counter and pouring herself a glass of wine. "Oh, you know how these tech CEOs are. Total egos. I had to spend the whole week holding their hands and fixing their messes. Honestly, David, I don't know how these wealthy guys survive without someone like me running their lives. They have all the money in the world, but absolutely no substance." The sheer audacity of her statement almost made me laugh out loud. She was talking about her other husband. She was standing in my kitchen, wearing the necklace I bought her for Christmas, mocking the billionaire she slept with on Tuesdays. "Well," I said softly, turning back to the stove, "I'm just glad you're back where you belong." "Always, babe," she said, tapping my lower back playfully as she walked toward the stairs to change. "No matter where I go, this is home." I gripped the handle of the frying pan so hard my knuckles turned white. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Sarah," I thought, "because your two worlds are about to crash directly into each other." For the next 2 weeks, I lived a lie just as profound as hers. Every morning, I went to school, taught my students about the fall of the Roman Empire, and smiled at my colleagues. But the moment the final bell rang, I became a detective. I didn't need to hire a private investigator. Sarah's old laptop was a goldmine, and her own arrogance was the key. She had saved all her passwords in the browser keychain. I had access to her secondary email, her flight histories, and her calendar. That was how I discovered the scale of her deception. She had a corporate LLC registered in Delaware under a fake name, which she used to funnel money and justify her consulting fees. To Richard Vance, she was a high-flying independent consultant who preferred to keep her finances separate to maintain her independence. To me, she was the corporate worker bee whose salary went into a joint savings account that I now realized was just pocket change compared to what she actually possessed. But the most disturbing thing was tracking her schedule. I mapped out the past year on a calendar in my mind. When my mother passed away in the hospital last November, Sarah had left after the funeral service, claiming an emergency boardroom crisis in Chicago. The truth? Richard was hosting a winter gala at the Art Institute, and she was on his arm as the elegant Mrs. Vance. When I had knee surgery in February, she flew out less than 24 hours later. Her excuse? A major logistics failure. The reality? It was Richard's 45th birthday party on a private yacht in Miami. Every memory I held dear was tainted. Every time I felt lucky to have her, she was actively betraying me. I decided I needed to see the man she was sharing her life with. On a Monday morning, right after Sarah left for the airport, I called in sick to school, the first time I had ever done so in 7 years of teaching. I drove 6 hours from Columbus to Chicago. I parked my modest Honda Accord down the street from the luxury high-rise penthouse listed in her secret iCloud documents. I sat there, sipping cheap gas station coffee, watching the entrance. Around 1 p.m., a black Mercedes Maybach pulled up to the curb. The doorman rushed forward, opening the door with a deep bow. Out stepped Richard Vance. He looked exactly like the photos, but in person, his aura of wealth was suffocating. He wore a crisp charcoal suit, and his face carried the stern, unbothered expression of a man who owned everything he looked at. And then, the passenger side door opened. Out stepped Sarah. She was wearing a cream-colored trench coat, huge designer sunglasses, and a pair of heels that probably cost 3 months of my mortgage. Richard reached out, pulled her close by the waist, and kissed her right there on the sidewalk. She laughed, tapping his chest playfully, the exact same gesture she used on me in our kitchen just 4 days prior. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning blue. Part of me wanted to throw open the car door, run across the street, and scream the truth at both of them. But I stopped myself. No, I thought. A scene on the sidewalk is messy. She will spin it. She will call the police, claim I'm a crazy stalker, and Richard's high-priced lawyers will bury me before I can even file for divorce. I have to be smarter. I watched them disappear into the golden lobby of the skyscraper. I put the car in drive and drove back to Ohio in complete silence, the dark highway stretching out ahead of me like my own empty future. The breakthrough came 3 days later, on Thursday night. Sarah was back in Columbus, sitting at our small dining table, casually picking at a salad. "Babe," she said, looking up from her phone with a perfectly rehearsed sigh. "Next month is going to be absolutely brutal. My firm is handling a massive international merger. I'm going to have to be in Chicago for 2 full weeks straight, starting July 24th. My heart did a sudden, violent flip. July 24th. 2 weeks? I asked, keeping my voice entirely flat, acting like the supportive, oblivious husband. Wow, that's a long time. Will you be able to come home for the weekend? I wish I could, sweetie, she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. But they have me organizing the entire closing event. It's a huge charity gala for the Vance Foundation. It's a massive deal for my career. If I pull this off, I might become a senior partner. The Vance Foundation. As soon as she went to sleep that night, I opened her old laptop and checked the public schedule for the Vance Foundation. Sure enough, July 25th was the annual Vanguard Gala at the Museum of Contemporary Art. It was the biggest social event of the summer for Chicago's elite. Tickets were thousands of dollars, and the guest list was strictly vetted. I logged into her secret email account. There it was, the digital guest list and the seating chart. She was listed as Sarah Vance, co-host and wife of the chairman. A slow, cold smile spread across my face in the dark of our basement. She wanted a grand stage for her corporate breakthrough. She wanted to play the high society queen on July 25th. I was going to give her exactly what she wanted. I was going to give her an audience she would never forget. I spent the rest of the night creating a fake identity. Using a high-end digital printing service online and a bit of graphic design, I created a press credential under the name of a freelance photographer for a prominent Midwest luxury lifestyle magazine. I knew the event would have dozens of photographers. A guy with a professional camera and a press badge wouldn't look out of place for a single second. The plan was locked in. I just had to survive the next 3 weeks playing the part of the dumb, doting husband. On the morning of July 24th, I stood at the front door to say goodbye to her. She looked stunning, packed for her 2-week corporate grind. "Wish me luck, babe," she said, wrapping her arms around me. "I'll call you every night before bed, okay?" "I know you will," I whispered into her hair. "Break a leg, Sarah. Make sure it's a night everyone remembers." "Oh, trust me," she smirked, her eyes gleaming with that insatiable greed. "It will be." She walked down the driveway, completely unaware that the man she thought she was leaving behind in the dust was already packing a tuxedo into the trunk of his car. The air in Chicago on the night of July 25th was heavy, thick with summer heat and the electric energy of the city's elite. I stood in a public restroom inside a parking garage 3 blocks away from the Museum of Contemporary Art, adjusting a black bow tie. Looking at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back. The tired suburban high school teacher in faded flannels was gone. In his place was a man tailored in a rented, high-end Italian tuxedo, carrying a professional Canon DSLR camera slung over his shoulder. The laminated press pass around my neck read, "David Vance, freelance editorial." I used my real first name and my mother's maiden name for the publication. It was a beautiful irony. I was a ghost walking into their castle. As I walked toward the museum, The roar of engines and the flash of paparazzi bulbs grew louder. Blacktown cars, custom Bentleys, and low-slung Lamborghinis were lining up at the red carpet. Women in gowns that cost more than my annual salary stepped out onto the velvet, accompanied by men who looked like they owned the banks those salaries were deposited in. I didn't take the main entrance. I walked right up to the media check-in gate at the side. My heart was pounding like a war drum against my ribs, but my face remained an icy, professional mask. I handed my fake credential to the young woman at the desk. She scanned the barcode, which I had meticulously linked to a cloned, active RSVP from an independent blog, and looked up with a tired smile. "Press pit is on the right, David. Keep behind the velvet ropes until the main reception starts," she said, handing me a media wristband. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. I walked into the grand atrium. The architecture was breathtaking. Towering glass walls, minimalist white pillars, and massive modern art installations hanging from the ceiling. Waiters in white gloves floated through the crowd carrying trays of crystal champagne flutes. And then I saw them. They were standing near the grand staircase, surrounded by a tight circle of city politicians and wealthy donors. Richard Vance looked imposing, his tailored tuxedo immaculate, a smug, effortless grin plastered on his face. And right beside him, holding his arm with a fierce, possessive grip, was my wife. Sarah looked otherworldly. She was wearing a midnight blue silk gown that draped perfectly over her shoulders. Her hair was up, exposing a diamond necklace that caught every light in the room. She was laughing at something a local senator said, her eyes bright, her body language radiating absolute power. She wasn't just attending the party, she was ruling it. She was the hostess, the billionaire's wife, the brilliant corporate strategist. I stepped into the press line, lifted my camera, and brought the lens to my eye. I zoomed in on her face. Through the viewfinder, I watched her lean in and whisper something in Richard's ear. He smiled and kissed her cheek. My finger pressed the shutter button. Click, click, click. The digital camera captured the betrayal in crystal clear, high-definition resolution. I felt a strange, cold detachment. The pain had burned out days ago. Now there was only the execution of the lesson. Around 8:30 p.m., the crowd began moving toward the main banquet hall for the dinner and the charity auction. Security loosened as the VIPs mingled. I slipped out of the press line, blending effortlessly into the crowd. Because I was dressed identically to the guests, nobody questioned a photographer moving among the tables. I knew the layout of the evening because I had studied the event itinerary on her old laptop. At 9:15 p.m., Richard was scheduled to take the main stage to give the keynote speech about the Foundation's achievements, followed by a tribute video showing their global philanthropic work. Sarah had spent the last week polishing that video file, which was stored on a secure flash drive handed over to the tech booth, but she had left the master file open in her hidden cloud drive, and I had spent the previous night doing some editing of my own. I walked up the back stairs toward the AV control booth overlooking the grand hall. The tech crew was busy adjusting audio levels and lighting cues. I knocked gently on the door, holding up my press badge and a high-end bottle of single malt scotch I had purchased at the duty-free shop. "Hey guys," I said, flashing a warm, casual smile. "I'm with the media team for the Vance family. Richard wanted me to hand-deliver this to the crew as a thank you for the heavy lifting tonight. Also, Sarah asked me to double-check the final render of the tribute video. We had a glitch with the formatting on the Chicago server this afternoon." The lead tech guy, a young kid with headphones around his neck, eyed the expensive bottle of scotch. His eyes lit up. Oh man, seriously? That's awesome. Yeah, come on in. The file is loaded on deck 2. We haven't locked the board yet. Perfect, I said, stepping inside. Let me just swap the USB drive to ensure the high bitrate version plays smoothly. Wouldn't want the boss to see pixelated graphics, right? Dude, please. The tech guy laughed, waving me toward the secondary console. Go ahead. Save my life. I pulled a black flash drive from my pocket. It looked identical to the one Sarah had prepared. I plugged it into the system, overwriting the original file named Vance_Foundation_tribute_2026.mp4. My heart hammered in my throat as the progress bar hit 100%. All set, I said, pulling my drive out and giving the kid a pat on the shoulder. It's going to be a show nobody will ever forget. Appreciate it, man, he said, already sliding the bottle of scotch into his backpack. I stepped out of the booth and walked down to the main floor. The dinner was being served. I found a spot near the back exit, right under the shadow of a large pillar, where I could see both the giant projection screens and the head table where Richard and Sarah sat. Sarah was glowing, sipping her champagne, totally convinced she had played the perfect game. She was at the absolute peak of her double life. She had no idea that the timer on her bomb had just entered the final countdown. At exactly 9:15 p.m., the house lights in the grand ballroom began to dim. The low hum of elite conversation died down as a sharp, resonant chime echoed through the state-of-the-art sound system. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone, his voice booming with practiced enthusiasm. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and patrons of the Vanguard Gala, please welcome to the stage a man who needs no introduction, our chairman, Richard Vance. The room erupted into polite, thunderous applause. I watched from the shadows of my pillar as Richard stood up from the head table. He turned to Sarah first, leaning down to plant a soft kiss on her lips. She beamed, adjusting his lapel with that sickeningly familiar, practiced touch of a devoted wife. She looked like she was on top of the world. Richard walked up the stairs to the stage, radiating power. He stood behind the podium, smiled warmly at the crowd, and raised his hands to quiet the applause. Thank you, everyone, Richard began, his voice deep and smooth. Thank you for being here tonight. When my family started the Vance Foundation, we had a simple vision: to invest in the future of our communities. But a vision is nothing without the right partnership. And tonight, before we look at what we've achieved this year, I want to publicly thank the woman who has been my absolute rock for the last 2 years. My brilliant, beautiful wife, Sarah. The spotlight swung directly to the head table, illuminating Sarah in a brilliant, blinding beam of white light. She offered a modest, elegant wave to the room, placing a delicate hand over her heart. The crowd sighed with admiration. Sarah, Richard continued, looking down at her from the stage, your dedication to this foundation, your tireless work behind the scenes, and your love have made me a better man. This next video is a tribute to the lives we've touched together. Roll the footage, please. Richard turned his head toward the massive 50-foot LED screens hanging above the stage. The ballroom went pitch black, save for the glow of the massive displays. A soft, cinematic piano melody started playing through the speakers. The title card appeared on the screen in elegant gold lettering: The Vance Foundation, a legacy of trust. Then, the video transitioned. But it wasn't the footage of housing projects or charity schools that Sarah had spent weeks organizing. The screen cut to a bright, sunny afternoon in a modest suburban backyard in Columbus, Ohio. The audio shifted from the cinematic piano to a raw, home video recording. On the massive screens, my voice filled the ballroom, loud and incredibly clear. "Happy 5th anniversary, beautiful. Look at the camera." On the screen, a younger, dressed-down Sarah in a simple summer dress and no makeup laughed, holding up a cheap vanilla cake with 5 candles on it. She looked directly into the camera, directly at the entire audience of Chicago billionaires, and blew a kiss. "5 years down, forever to go, David. I love our quiet little life here." Her voice echoed through the high-end speakers. The ballroom fell into a suffocating, dead silence. You could literally hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. Richard froze on stage, his jaw dropping as he stared up at the screen. The spotlight operator, completely confused, accidentally left the light on Sarah. I watched her face drain of all color in real time. Her eyes widened into discs of pure, unadulterated terror. But the video didn't stop. It transitioned seamlessly into a clean, professionally designed slideshow. Next came the side-by-side comparison of her calendars. On the left screen, June 14th, 2024. Marriage certificate to Richard Vance in Chicago. On the right screen, June 14th, 2024. Text messages to David Vance. "Hey babe, this corporate retreat in Scottsdale is so boring. Wish I was home in Ohio with my husband. Kiss the dog for me." Gasps rippled through the audience like a wave. People were pulling out their phones, recording the screens, whispering frantically to one another. Then came the final blow. The screen filled with a massive, high-definition screenshot of the text message Sarah had sent to her friend, the one I had found on her old laptop. "David gives me the stability and the real, quiet love I need when I'm exhausted. He's sweet, safe, and worships the ground I walk on. But Richard gives me the world. I don't see why I should have to choose. I have the best of both worlds, and neither of them is smart enough to figure it out." The text stayed on the screen for 5 agonizing seconds. And then, a final title card appeared in stark, cold white text on a black background. "The best of both worlds ends tonight. Sincerely, husband number 1." The video cut to black. The house lights slammed on automatically. The silence lasted for 1 terrible second before absolute chaos erupted. Richard Vance turned slowly from the stage, his face purple with rage, his chest heaving. He stared down at Sarah with a look of pure, murderous betrayal. Sarah stood up from the table, her hands shaking so violently, she knocked over her crystal glass, sending red wine spilling across the white tablecloth like blood. Richard, it's a lie. It's a deep fake. Someone hacked us," she screamed, her voice cracking. The elegant, poised corporate queen completely dissolving into a panicked, cornered animal. But Richard wasn't listening. He slammed his microphone down onto the podium, the screeching feedback making half the room wince, and marched down the stairs straight toward her. From the back of the room, standing safely in the shadows of the pillar, I lifted my camera one last time. I brought the viewfinder to my eye, focused on her terrified, tear-streaked face, and pressed the shutter. The grand ballroom of the Museum of Contemporary Art transformed into a high-society war zone. Richard Vance didn't care about the cameras, the politicians, or the millions of dollars sitting in that room. He marched straight up to Sarah, his face contorted in an expression of pure, unbridled fury. "Richard, please, listen to me," Sarah begged, her voice shrinking as she reached out to grab his arm. Richard violently snapped his arm back, shaking her off as if she were a venomous snake. "Get your hands off me!" he roared, his voice echoing over the hushed whispers of the crowd. "Who the hell is David? Who is he? It's a setup. It's a corporate hit to ruin the foundation." She lied, her eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately looking for an escape route, a friendly face, or the tech booth. She was trying to deploy her usual corporate damage control, but her voice was trembling too much. The arrogant, untouchable queen who thought she could outsmart two men had completely broken down. "Security!" Richard screamed, turning away from her entirely, refusing to even look at her face. "Get this woman out of my sight! Clear the room! The gala is over!" Security guards in suits rushed forward, politely but firmly grabbing Sarah by the arms. She started screaming, losing all her high society poise, her expensive heels scraping against the polished marble floor as they escorted her out of the main hall through the side doors. The crowd scrambled, cell phones raised high, capturing every single second of her public ruin. I watched the whole thing play out. I felt no joy, no triumphant rush of adrenaline. Just a profound, quiet sense of relief. The truth was out in the open, burning down the fake empire she had built on the backs of my trust and Richard's money. I turned around, walked out of the back exit of the museum, and stepped into the cool Chicago night air. I walked back to the public parking garage, took off the rented tuxedo jacket, and threw it into the back seat of my Accord. I unbuttoned the top of my dress shirt, took a deep breath of the city air, and started the engine. I drove back to Columbus through the night. 3 weeks later, the dust finally began to settle. The story had become a massive tabloid sensation in Chicago and the Midwest. The bigamist wife of billionaire Richard Vance. Richard's high-priced legal team didn't just file for divorce. They filed for an absolute annulment based on fraud and bigamy. Because her marriage to Richard was never legally valid in the first place, his lawyers invoked clauses that froze every single one of her secondary bank accounts, seized the Chicago penthouse, and stripped her of every luxury asset she had accumulated over the past 2 years. She was left with absolutely nothing from her billionaire life. And then came my turn. I filed for divorce in Ohio. Because I had clean, undeniable evidence of her using our joint funds to travel for her second marriage, and proof of her criminal bigamy, my lawyer made sure she didn't get a single dime of our suburban assets either. The final time I saw Sarah was in a small, sterile conference room at my lawyer's office to sign the final papers. She wasn't wearing a designer silk gown or a diamond necklace. She wore a plain gray sweater and jeans, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a bitter, hollow look. She sat across the table from me, staring at the pen in her hand. Before she signed, she looked up at me, her eyes drilling into mine. "You ruined my life, David," she whispered, her voice spitting venom. "You could have just asked for a divorce. You could have left quietly. You didn't have to humiliate me in front of the entire world. You're just a petty, small-minded schoolteacher." I looked at her, completely unfazed by her anger. For the first time in 5 years, I saw her for what she truly was, a deeply insecure, greedy person who valued status over human souls. "I didn't ruin your life, Sarah," I said softly, leaning forward. "You chose to live 2 lives. I just made sure you only had to live one from now on. The honest one." She slammed the pen down, signed the papers, and walked out of the room without saying another word. Now, it's a beautiful Friday afternoon in Columbus. The school year just ended, and the summer break is finally here. I'm sitting on the back porch of my house, watching the sun set over the yard I built. The air is warm, the neighborhood is quiet, and for the first time in a very long time, the silence doesn't feel lonely. It feels like peace.